Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. I'm in a number of Second Coming groups on Facebook, like you probably are. And from time to time, you come across things like this. This is titled Vision Given William F. Pershon in 1936, given in District Presidency Conference, April 29th, 1956, given him by the Spirit. So this caught my attention because I have a couple of spreadsheets that this could go on. I have one for visions and visitations, and then I have another one for false and unverified prophecies about the future. So I had to categorize this and guess which one this goes on. Okay, so William F. Pershon. This was a real person. This is him right here. You have President David O. McKay. He was there for the dedication of the Switzerland Temple, and next to him is who was going to be the temple president, and then next to him, the mission president of the Swiss-Austrian mission, William F. Pershon. So this is who supposedly had this vision and prophecy about the future. We're going to be looking at an article from August 1974 in the Ensign titled Blessing at the Swiss Temple, which does have an interesting story. And this happened around the same time as this supposed district conference that took place. This was a year earlier. It was in Switzerland, and so I don't know. I don't know if this was the inspiration for what we're about to read, or I don't know, but it's just kind of interesting, the dates. So let's go ahead and read this. The church and the nation of America will be thrown into great upheaval. Already, right off the bat, you can already tell what kind of thing this is. On my spreadsheet for false and unverified visions and prophecies, it's always like this. There's this fixation on the destruction of America and how bad things are going to be. And you better hope that you find a place of safety. You better be prepared. It's going to get really, really bad. Always. It's, and I think it's because this is what I call doom and gloom entertainment. It's something that's meant to mimic the church. It's supposed to mimic the scriptures, mimic other valid, true prophecies, but be more exciting to get the dopamine flowing. That's what you get out of it, because then you have the secret prophecy that nobody knows about. You also get to feel special because then you share it with people, sometimes on Facebook, and it's basically entertainment. Okay, so in this mess, there will be occasional islands of safety. These islands are the stakes of the church, where the leaders have the true love of Christ in their hearts. These stakes will survive and form the nucleus of the church. There will be thousands that will fall away from the church, not only members, but also general authorities. Okay, so this is where this starts to become spiritually dangerous, because you have so many people, so many apostates or tares within the church that want to undermine your confidence in church leadership. Sometimes it goes so far as people declaring that there's going to be a church-wide apostasy before the second coming, that you're going to have to be able to discern who the true, so in other words, it usually goes this way. Usually there's the idea that there's going to be a Davidic servant, or the marred servant, or the one mighty and strong, based on scriptures that are being misinterpreted, but used in such a way to convince you that there's going to be some prophetic figure that comes to correct the church, and you better be able to recognize them because the church has gone astray. And it's very dangerous because that's not going to happen. I'm not going to go over all the quotes and scriptures that I have about that right now, but this is the only time, this is the only dispensation that the church is not going to fall into apostasy, because it's preparing the church and the world for the second coming. So I have a problem with this. Okay, continuing. All the members will be more severely tried at this time than at any other time in the history of the church, except with the possibility of those who first organized the church. Okay, so this is being given in, this was first recorded, I guess, in 1936. So 106 years after the church was established. So if you were a baby, if you were born in 1836 or 1830, at the time that this was recorded, you would now be 106 years old. So unless he's just referring to just like those early church members in general, not strictly those that were alive at the time that the church was organized, but just like the early, first several decades of the church. I don't know. Continuing, the country of the United States awaits a great destruction, of course. And the elders of the church will grasp hold of the government and save the country. This will occur shortly before the coming of the Son of Man. The U.S. economy, oh my gosh, it always goes to this too. It can't just be the destruction of the United States. There's always this like economic twist to these things. Like there's like this fixation on resources. I, I I don't know what it is, you guys. I don't know if it's like, I don't want to insult anybody, but sometimes I wonder if there's mental illness going on, because there's certain mental illness out there that kind of like is paranoid and worried about scarcity of things and plots and um, massive plans, like secret plans against them. I don't know what it is, but it just okay. The US economy will not be worth salt. All stocks and bonds and securities will melt away like snow before the summer sun. When the next Great Depression hits, it will affect all people, not just the poor as the last one did, but rich and poor alike, members and non members of, and even general authorities. As a result of this, the United Order will be brought into effect by force. Okay, I don't like how that's termed, and I don't think that that's right. If this is being received by the Spirit, I don't think the Spirit would use that kind of terminology. The United Order will be brought into effect by force, not by free will, as many think it will be. Yeah, that sounds like our doctrine in the gospel. The condition of the people will be will be such that only by helping one another will they be able to survive. The United Order will come into being even as the welfare plan came into being as a result of the last depression. The church was forced into the welfare plan. Um Again, I'm not a big fan of how that's being phrased. I think it came by inspiration and maybe specific revelation. I've never looked into the history of the welfare plan, but I don't think it's because the church was forced into it. The church was forced into the welfare plan and also will be forced into the United Order. Doctrine and Covenants, section 78, verses 17 to, and then they just don't put the end verse, just 17 to, I don't know, infinity. When this depression comes, land will be the only thing, missing a G, which will be of value. Also, properties will be of value if clear of all encumbrances. Not too much money should be kept because it will be valueless. Okay, so this is where this is starting to become temporally dangerous. If you were to take action off of this, if you like held this to be true, then this could affect your finances if you were to follow this thing, because then you'd be like, oh, why invest Why have stocks and bonds and um, like I should focus mostly on land. This could really affect people, you guys. This is like really not good. Um, it will be much like the inflation after the war in Germany, in that the farmers will be the ones that are rich because they have enough to eat. They'll be like kings because of their produce. So land is the best investment there is. That is why the church has all these properties. The properties in Florida cares for the southeastern saints. Canada cares for Canada and northwestern saints. California for California, and Southwest members, uh, Utah and Idaho will support themselves. I love how some of these just like get so specific like this. The welfare plan is the beginning of the United Order, and in it and of it, the church will stand. The time will come when all the members will be dependent on this plan. Well, even though I don't like a lot of the things in this, I can't just categorize this based on how I feel about it. And so I tried to substantiate it, see if at least this was in the church history catalog, or just recorded anywhere. And I don't know where this comes from. It just this blank sheet of paper that somebody took a picture of and then posted on Facebook. Um, so until I hear like some general authority say that this is credible or confirm it, I'm probably just going to disregard this. In fact, I'm gonna take the same attitude as Elder Renlund. So let's go to the October 2022 General Conference. His talk was called "A Framework for Personal Revelation." He said, "A second element of the framework is that we receive personal revelation only within our purview and not within the prerogative of others. In other words, we take off and land in our appointed runway. The importance of well defined runways was learned early in the history of the Restoration. Hiram Page, one of the 8 witnesses to the Book of Mormon, claimed to be receiving revelations for the entire church. Several members were deceived and wrongly influenced." Okay, so this is the problem right here. When we start to have visions, maybe publish them as books based on whatever visions, near death experiences, things that affect the entire world or the whole church, or even just anybody outside yourself and maybe your family, like you, your wife, your kids. By the way, Hiram Page, he's actually buried here in Missouri. Um, I think it's only about like maybe a half hour drive from Independence. And as you're going to Richmond, where David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery are buried, and Jacob Whitmer and the Whitmer family, a lot of them. Um, so he ended up essentially apostatizing. Here's a nice historical marker that was put in place by the Far West Missouri Stake. You can pause and read this, but it tells his, this is like a life sketch of sorts. Um, but yeah, it's kind of sad how he ended up, but he was the first apostate in the church. In his story, well, some of it's recorded in Doctrine and Covenants, where he was claiming that he had a seer stone and he was also receiving revelations for the church. And that's not the Lord's way. The Lord's house is not a house of confusion. And that was not Hiram Page's runway. Okay, continuing. In response, the Lord revealed that, quote, "No one shall be appointed to receive commandments and revelations," which would include visions, "in this church, excepting my servant Joseph Smith until I appoint another in his stead." Doctrine, commandments, and revelations for the church are the prerogative of the living prophet who receives them from the Lord Jesus Christ. That is the prophet's runway. So it's not the mission president's runway. It's not the patriarch's runway, the high priest, the stake president, the bishop, the elders quorum president, the relief society president. A lot of times people like to use their titles and just really quick, I should be clear. Um, we don't know at all that President William F. Pershon even wrote this. This is probably some other person wanting to feel special, or trick people, or they just felt like producing a hoax, and then they used him to be the one to uh, be the one who supposedly had that vision. I highly doubt, I highly, highly doubt that he actually wrote this. Okay. Again, the whole thing cannot be verified at all. At least my initial attempt to verify it was fruitless. If you have more, please send it my way. If you can tell me where to find this. Um, Elder Renlund goes on to tell a story. I'm not going to read this. These are my old highlights, but he told the story of a guy that was trying to convince him that there was scripture that was like buried under in the basement of a building, and he wanted Elder Renlund to sign off on this, and that this crazy guy would be the one to translate the scripture. And he asked Elder Renlund to pray about it. And this is what Elder Renlund said. I told him I would not. He became verbally abusive. Oh, surprise. And ended the phone call. I did not need to pray about this request for one simple but profound reason. Only the prophet receives revelation for the church. Later on, he goes on to talk about personal revelation, which includes things like who you decide to marry, where you go to school, how many children to have, um, things that are within your responsibility. So that's another reason why I don't even really consider this, because nobody outside the president of the church would receive a revelation like this or have a vision like this. And if they did, it would just be for their own personal benefit. It could be highly symbolic and not necessarily things that are actually going to play out, but it's coded in such a way that it has meaning to you. But I do not accept this. So I put this on I want to take note of it in case it pops up again. I put this on my spreadsheet called quotes false/unverified. Some of these things have been declared to be false by authoritative sources like President Joseph F. Smith, President Joseph Fielding Smith, Graham Doxey in an Ensign article, and whatever others. Other accounts just can't be verified. There's maybe a couple on here that I do tend to think could be real, but they make certain claims and they can't be verified. So I just have to be like, well, somebody said that, and I don't know if it's true. So I'm just going to put it here. So this is my newest entry. It is on row 14. So this is, so you have to minus that first row because that's where I have the titles of these different columns. So this is 13 false or unverified prophecies about the future. Again, we're going to read this really interesting story that is a true vision that happened in connection with the Swiss temple. Before we get to that, in regards to the United States being destroyed, I'm going to go with prophets and apostles and those who are authorized to speak on that. So just really quick, this is a quick review. This is on my spreadsheet called quotes A through Z. Row 34 for America, cleansing of, destruction of, etc. This first one comes from, at the time, Elder Harold B. Lee of the Quorum of the 12, April 1942 General Conference. He later became president of the church. And he addressed the idea of the Constitution hanging by a thread right here, um, and about the future of the United States. But then, in regards to the fulfillment of that prophecy, because a lot of times people like to fixate on that prophecy and they have this idea that, um, I don't know what they think, but that they think that the church is going to start running the United States, or the government's going to come to Salt Lake City and be like, help us. We don't know how to do this anymore. But at the time, Elder Harold B. Lee said uh, that it had to do with the preaching of the gospel and going to the temple, which gives us additional power. But it comes down to the preaching of the gospel. Therein lies the responsibility of this church in sanctifying this people and this nation, that they might be spared the judgments that otherwise might come upon them, were it not for the preaching of the humble elders of this church. We have this from him as well. At this point, he's president of the church, and he says, I think we must be on the optimistic side. This is a great nation. This is a great country. This is the most favored of all lands. While it is true that there are dangers and difficulties that lie ahead of us, we must not assume that we are going to lie down and watch the country go to ruin. We should not be heard to predict ills and calamities for the nation, which is exactly what we just read from this supposed vision, which I don't think is a true vision. If it was, not if it was, but if he actually did write that himself and it wasn't some other person, then here we have it. We should not be heard to predict ills and calamities for this nation. On the contrary, we should be providing optimistic support of the nation. It is the negative, pessimistic comments about the nation that do as much harm as anything to the country today. Brethren, we must tell them in a positive way what they should be doing, or in other words, preaching the gospel. We should not be so concerned about finding out what is wrong with America, but we should be finding what is right about America and should be speaking optimistically and enthusiastically about America. Later on, yes, men may fail, but this nation won't fail. I have faith in America. A couple more things. We have this from Elder Mark E. Peterson of the Quorum of the 12. He talks about the flag of the United States flying into the millennium, which again, there aren't going to be nations in the millennium as we know them now. The entire earth is going to be the political kingdom of God, but I do tend to think that there will probably be provinces, territories, districts, or something that goes along the same national borders that we have now. Just that they won't be sovereign, independent nations; it'll all be under Christ. But he talks about the flag flying into the millennium. We have this from President Nelson, as told by Elder Gerald N. Lund. I'll have to move me up here. You can find this on LDS Living, an article from October 7th, 2020, where he and other 70s were talking about the economy and how things were looking really bleak at the time that this story happened. And President Nelson came. At that time, he was in the Quorum of the 12, and they asked him what he thought about the economy and what was going on. And President Nelson said, Brethren, the Lord chose the United States of America as the place for the restoration of the gospel in our dispensation. He did that so we would have a base of religious freedom that would sustain the work of the restoration. Also, the financial affluence and the political stability of the United States makes it possible for our church to take the gospel to the world. That is a task that is a task that is not yet finished. Brethren, the Lord is at the helm. He will not let this work fail. And then finally, we have this from President Oaks. At the time, first counselor in the first presidency, April 2021 General Conference. He said, "We should trust in the Lord and be positive about this nation's future." So I'm going to go with these true and authorized servants of the Lord who have the authority to talk about the future of the world and the future of the United States and the church. And what they say contradicts this unverifiable supposed vision of a mission president received in the 1830s. Um, in regard to the United Order, it's interesting because recently I was at Far West and there was a group of BYU professors there. They were doing like a church history tour. And one of them, like they kind of, so we sat where the monuments were. They invited me to come and listen because one of them was going to tell the history of Far West. And, but then there were a couple other presenters. And one of them was talking about the law of consecration and how there's a misconception that we're not living the law of consecration right now, which we are, but how certain members of the church believe that the United Order is the true implementation of the law of consecration. And he was saying that, excuse me, he was saying that the United Order simply became what's now the corporation of the church. So, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, we are living the law of consecration now. Um, it's not quite right, as it turns out. I'm gonna go with church materials and what's been published by the church that goes through correlation. This is on the church website, Doctrine and Covenants Student Manual, section 92. What is the difference between the law of consecration and the United Order? The law of consecration is the law whereby individuals consecrate their time, talents, and possessions to the Lord. The United Order was an organization set up to implement the law of consecration. Elder Bruce R. McConkie explained the difference. Quote, "In order to live the law of consecration, the early saints in this dispensation set up the United Order as the legal organization to receive consecrations, convey stewardships back to donors, and to regulate the storehouses containing surplus properties." So the United Order, it's not to be confused with the law of consecration itself, but it's an organization to carry out these functions. Additionally, this is still in Doctrine and Covenants Student Manual, Enrichment L, the Law of Consecration and Stewardship. Under section L8, called Preparing for Consecration, it says this: "The United Order and its attendant laws will not be fully realized until the redemption of Zion, the New Jerusalem." So it is still the plan to have the United Order. I don't know that the corporation right now is really considered. I mean, I guess maybe it kind of in a way is similar, but it doesn't seem like it's been, like it says here, fully realized. President J. Reuben Clark Jr. said, quote, "In the meaning in which the Lord was using the term Zion, the redemption means the reestablishment of the people in Missouri. This has not yet been accomplished." Well, he said that in 1945. I don't know about 2026, but there's a lot of us here now. We have a temple, multiple stakes, and the area is growing. Continuing, the work of the kingdom today is to prepare for that great event. The current church programs of welfare and temporal preparation foreshadow the practice of consecration. Later on, full implementation of the United Order must, according to the Revelation, await the redemption of Zion. Doctrine and Covenants 105:34. In the meantime, while we are being more perfectly taught and are gaining experience, we should be strictly living the principles of the United Order insofar as they are embodied in present church requirements, such as tithing, fast offerings, welfare projects, storehouses, and other principles and practices. Through these programs, we should, as individuals, implement in our own lives the bases of the United Order. So it's not the same as the law of consecration, but it's basically the legal framework for like fully living the law of consecration as like a church. Although we ourselves can fully live the law of consecration now through these things: tithing, fast offerings, welfare projects, and also just consecrating your time and talents and your efforts and energies and the resources that you have. So we are living the law of consecration, but as far as like what the Lord has planned for the church and for society, uh, that won't be realized until the future. Most likely not until the millennium, I would guess. So I'm going to add these to my spreadsheet so I can refer back to it again. And then the last thing that I want to cover is this. So again, this is the August 1974 ensign, blessing at the Swiss Temple. Now, I haven't added this to my visions and visitations spreadsheet, but I will because this was published by the church. It comes from an authoritative source. All right, it says, one of the most inspirational temple experiences I have ever heard comes from this is by Ned L. Mangleson. Okay, it was published in a church magazine, the Ensign. One of the most inspirational temple experiences I've ever heard comes from my missionary journal entry of February 12th, 1955. At a district conference in Winterthur, Switzerland, William F. Pershon, then president of the Swiss-Austrian mission, read part of a letter from Brother Jacob Ritter, then president of the Pratten branch near Basel, Switzerland. In the letter, Brother Ritter detailed the spiritual manifestation that he received on the night of November 14th, 1954, when President Stephen L. Richards talked to the members and missionaries in Basel after the Swiss Temple cornerstone was laid. President Richards' first counselor to President Mackay was 75 years old at the time and had come to Switzerland after conducting an exhausting series of church business meetings in England. He became very ill before the Basel meeting, so weak that he could hardly stand, and told President Pershon that he would be unable to attend the conference. President Pershon opened the conference, asking that everyone offer a silent prayer that the Lord would give President Richards the strength necessary to deliver his message. Brother Ritter, like many others, offered a prayer in his heart for President Richards. Brother Ritter is not a man given to fantasies, but is a man of great faith and is very strong in the gospel. As he sat in the audience, he saw, here we go. He saw tongues of fire above the heads of those seated upon the stand. It was made known to him that those tongues of fire would begin to rise, and at the moment they reached the ceiling, President Richards would arrive. Okay, let's go ahead and put that in red. It happened just that way. As the tongues of fire reached the ceiling, President Richards walked into the room, and as he stood at the pulpit to speak, the Holy Ghost so filled Brother Ritter's body that he trembled all over and tears gushed from his eyes. Let's highlight that too. I'm going to highlight it because I'm going to highlight it when I add it to my spreadsheet, and I need to know which parts need to be highlighted. I personally recall the talk that President Richards gave that night, and it was as if a direct revelation had come from the Lord to those people who needed to prepare themselves for the dedication of the first temple in Europe. He spoke with great enthusiasm, insight, and inspiration. When he had finished giving his instructions to the saints and missionaries, he was physically drained and had to be taken immediately to the mission home. It was a testimony to us to see how the Lord would answer prayer by giving his servant the strength to come to that meeting and deliver his message. This is actually similar to a story about President Spencer W. Kimball in New Zealand. I'd have to look it up, but I think the story was told by President Nelson because President Nelson was his doctor. and there was going to be this big conference. I think it was like for the youth. It was going to be like an outdoor thing. President Kimball was ill, and he was going to have to cancel his appearance, but the whole congregation was led in prayer by one of the youth, and the youth gave like a really long prayer and prayed that President Spencer W. Kimball would be able to come. and, and as he finished the prayer, President Kimball's car came into the stadium or whatever it was, the area with the bleachers or whatever, and everybody saw it and stood up and shouted and celebrated that a miracle had taken place right as he ended the prayer. So it's interesting that we have another similar story here. And I think that's it. Let me just double check the tabs, make sure I didn't miss anything. Here's Hiram Page. I hope that Hiram Page makes it. I hope that there can be forgiveness, and maybe just his life circumstances. It's just, I don't know. I'd like to think that there's like a lot of lenience for those early days of the church, because the church was brand new and people were being expected to believe a lot of brand new things that would have people consider you as crazy. We even have that problem even up until today, but it was even worse for them. And then on top of that, they were being asked to do really difficult things like move different places and they were persecuted by the mobs. So anyway, yeah, that's it. Okay, well, that's gonna be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.